All right, good evening. Thank you so much, Reverend Studstill. We've got a lengthy agenda tonight, so we're just going to kind of move on through this thing. Thank you all so much for coming out. Thanks to the 3 candidates for coming out. We really appreciate you being out here. But I think we got a lot of good information that we're going to share tonight. So the agenda tonight is basically Dr. Aubrey Jewett. Come on up. He'll be the first up, and he'll go through the constitutional amendments that'll be on the ballot. Then I'll have Minister Larry Hopkins come up. He'll talk about his specific thoughts on Amendment 4, which is restoring the rights of ex-felons to vote. Then we will have Orange County Clerk of Courts, Tiffany Moore Russell, come up, and she will talk about Amendment 10 specifically. And then we will have a forum with the 3 candidates for sheriff. And it's not a debate. I've given them the questions beforehand. And so we're just going to hear their thoughts on community policing, diversity, hiring practices, stand your ground, use of force, use of deadly force, and how they will work to reduce crime in communities on the west side of town, and how they will work with community leaders, religious leaders, elected officials to make our community a safer place. And so with that, I'm going to have Dr. Aubrey Jewett come up, and I will let you introduce yourself, because who better to introduce yourself?
All right, thank you, sir. All right, well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Aubrey Jewett, and I'm a political science professor at UCF. I have had the privilege. All right, well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Aubrey Jewett, and I'm a political science professor at UCF. I have had the privilege of working there. I was just talking to Reverend Hopkins, and he asked me, I can't believe I've been there 23 years, got there in 1995. So I've been there quite a while. And I am considered an expert on state and local politics and Florida politics. So I guess that's why I'm here tonight, because I have tried to go through and look at all these amendments, and hopefully I'll be able to explain them to you in a non-legal fashion, but enough to where you understand what it is you're voting on, and try to go through a little bit of pro, a little bit of con, and as I always tell my students, it's up to you to figure out how to vote, right? So, all right. So with that, let's get started. And I think there's a time for question at the end, but I've given this presentation to UCF students the last 2 nights, actually, a couple hundred different students. So if anybody had a question as I'm going along, just feel free to raise your hand and wave at me, and we can take questions as we go through as well. All right. Well, let's start off with the first 2 amendments. Both of these first 2 are about property taxes. Amendment 1 would increase the homestead exemption by $25,000. And so basically what that means is when your property taxes are being computed for a home that you own, let us say that the property appraiser said your house was worth $150,000. What this would do is say, okay, now it's only going to be worth $125,000 when we figure out your taxes. So basically, it would reduce the amount of taxes that you have to pay. I mean, that's the basic of it. And I've seen some studies that suggested to put it in dollar figures. They said it would save the average homeowner maybe a couple $100s a year on their property taxes. So, I mean, in that sense, it's pretty straightforward. It would, if you vote yes for this, that would mean that if you own a home, or your parents own a home, or friends or whatever, if it's their primary home, they would pay a little bit less in property taxes. And so that's kind of the pro. If you own a home and you want to pay a little bit less taxes, you would. Now, the con, because most of these have 2 sides. The Florida Association of Counties and the Florida League of Cities have both come out against this one. And the reason is, if there is a property tax cut, property taxes are the main way that we fund local services for counties and cities. And so for the counties and cities, they basically say, okay, for each homeowner, they might only gain a couple $100. But for the counties and cities, we're going to be losing millions of dollars potentially. And then we'd have less to provide services to, say, police, fire, EMT, to build roads, etc. So that's basically the 2 sides of Amendment 1. Amendment 2 is also about property taxes. And There's a couple big differences though. Amendment 2, if the first one is only about your primary residence, your homestead is legally what they call it, the house that you own and live in. The second one is all about non-homesteaded property. So it's basically about all the other property. It's about vacant lots, it's about rental properties, it's about storefronts and office buildings. And what this amendment would do is actually just continue something that we've been doing for the last 10 years. About 10 years ago, we approved a measure that said for non-homesteaded property, your property appraisal would be capped at no more than a 10% increase per year when they get ready to figure your taxes. And so we've already been doing this for the last 10 years, but it has been a temporary measure. It is about to expire. And so this is now, the legislature put the first one and the second one on the ballot, and what they'd like to do is make it permanent. And again, without getting into a lot more detail, in brief, it just would mean that all the other properties, not the homes you own, but all the other properties potentially end up paying a little bit less taxes than they might otherwise pay. And I say might because in many years, maybe the property values don't even go up 10%. And so since this just caps it at 10%, and if the property values actually went up less than 10%, it wouldn't even have any effect at all. But in years where maybe inflation was just zooming and the housing bubble was zooming, it would cap the increase in taxes a little bit. So who is for this? Well, the Florida Chamber of Commerce, small business owners, people who own second homes, people who own vacation homes, maybe who visit from Canada or from up north. They're all for this because they want to at least have a little bit of a limit on how much the value of their property can go up, and it would curb their property taxes a little bit. And as far as the con side, who's against it, I'll just say that the local governments aren't thrilled with it. On the one hand, it wouldn't mean a big change for local government money right now because it's been in effect for 10 years, so they haven't been getting any extra money as it is. On the other hand, if it didn't pass and it expired, then potentially local governments would get a little bit more money because those property values would be increasing more and taxes would be up a little bit. All right, Amendment 3 is called Voter Control of Gambling. If the first two were put on the ballot by the legislature, Amendment 3 was put on by initiative petition. You basically have two big groups that have spent literally between them almost $40 million to get this on the ballot and to advertise it. That would be Disney, and that would be the Seminole Tribe of Florida. And what this would do, at least it's somewhat straightforward, it just basically would say that if we were going to expand casino gambling in the state of Florida, voters would have to approve of it. Currently, voters could approve of it if it got put on the ballot as an initiative, but the legislature also has the ability to just pass a law to say we could have more casino gambling than we have now. So basically what this would do, in another way of looking at it, is it's going to take the power away from the legislature to approve more gambling and give it to the public. If we were ever going to have more gambling than we have today as far as casino gambling, the public would have to approve of it. And that's basically the long and the short. For Disney and the Seminole Tribe of Florida, what they think is that if this passes, it will be more difficult to expand gambling. Because they're betting, no pun intended, they're betting that if it's up to the voters of Florida, they'll be less likely to say, yes, we want more gambling. Whereas the legislature might be a little more likely to say yes. And so the reason that Disney is behind it and has spent $20 million plus is because how many hundreds of millions have they invested in their tourism brand over the last 40 years? They want a family-friendly Florida, a family-friendly Central Florida. They don't want people standing hour after hour pulling slot machines, and they want them to be at the theme parks. And when people think about Orlando and Florida, they don't want them to think of like Vegas or Jersey. They want them to think, Mickey. And for the Seminole Tribe of Florida, it's also about their self-interest. Currently, they have a near monopoly on casino-style gambling. The Miccosukee tribe also has some gambling, but mostly it's the Seminole tribe. We do have a couple, we have a few racetracks with slot machines and such down in Miami-Dade and Broward, so we do have a little other casino-style gambling, but for the most part, it's almost all the Seminole tribe. And so why have they spent almost $20 million on this? Because they don't want any more competition. I mean, if you were raking in hundreds of millions of dollars a year, I guess you wouldn't want the competition either. I guess they don't want it to go away. So that's why, so make no mistake, they're behind it because they think it's in their self-interest. So what does it come down to you as voters? Well, if you want to make it harder to have casino gambling in Florida or more casino gambling in Florida, then you should vote yes on this. Because the thought is that if it goes to a vote of the people, it'll be harder to pass future expansion of gambling. Conversely, if you're a fan of casino gambling or you just don't think that it's right that there's a monopoly for the Seminole tribe or something like that, then you should vote against it.